Welcome to the Engaged by Design podcast, where we drive innovation and help you as a leader engage more learners more effectively. I'm Dr. Vernon Smith, and I'm here with my co-host, Dr. Michael Cottom.
Hey, thank you, Vernon. It's really good to be with you today, and we have a really great guest on the podcast once again.
We are so excited and honored to have Dr. Jennifer Douglas with us today. We call her Jenny. And Dr. Douglas brings together an enduring curiosity about what it means to be human, a strategic mindset for building new educational frameworks, and a coaching-centered leadership philosophy. Now, Jenny has a PhD in literature. Her career in higher ed has focused on leading large-scale projects in online adult learning and graduate education spaces, where both Michael and I had the opportunity and the honor of working with her. She's great. She now coaches individuals and groups with a holistic approach to help amplify their leadership impact by increasing emotional resilience, breaking through inner barriers to success, and transforming their mind-body wellness. All those things are just so real. Jenny, welcome to the Engaged by Design podcast.
Thank you, Vernon and Michael. I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
We're just excited to hear from you and to reconnect. You know, it's been a little while since we worked together, but man, we did some big things.
Yes,
it has
we did.
been a little while, but it's great to see the direction that you're moving in and this podcast, and to just get to reconnect about things that are important to us.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I've always been impressed with Jenny is just her constant purposefulness and intentionality in the way she approaches things. And it's when I'd have meetings with my deans, and Jenny was the Dean of Graduate Studies and an awesome one. She always came with not only issues or challenges that we may have, but she always came with solutions. And that is high praise for a leader in any situation. Hey, Jenny, because we know you, but others might know you, let's talk a little bit about you. Can you share some of the experiences that helped shape your leadership and abilities over time?
Absolutely. And I was actually going to go back because we talked about an attention-getting thing, like something you might not know about me from my past. So I was actually going to go to the way back reel from a long time ago and talk a little bit about my background and my family, because that's definitely been informative to me and my educational journey and my leadership journey. So you may remember, I don't know, that I grew up in northern Pennsylvania, this very rural area, very beautiful, lots of rolling hills and lots of dairy farms. That was the primary industry of that area. And my mom's family were dairy farmers, as were a lot of my friends' families growing up. So I grew up in barns, around the barn, around animals, quite a lot, which surprises some people when they look at me now. But my hidden talent that I usually don't talk about with people is, as I was finishing up high school and going off to college, I spent a couple of summers working on one of my friends' farms. And so I do actually know how to milk cows.
Yes.
That's what I was doing, going to the farm a couple of times a day and doing chores, which gives you a really great appreciation for how much you can do before 7 a.m. if you really want to.
Oh, crazy. Yeah.
Yeah. Just like really hard physical work, but also really satisfying that you're like, oh, well, we did that already. We just finished this big 2-hour sprint early in the morning, and we've accomplished something. But I wanted to also kind of tie it back into my larger family history, and that is on my mom's side of the family, who were the dairy farmers. My great-grandfather actually went to Penn State, I think this would be in the 1920s, to get a dairy science degree. And that led him to be able to, he ended up going to South Carolina with the family to take over the management of this very large dairy operation, like in the early 1930s, because of the education that he's had. And he was trying to bring in this, some more scientific management principles, what was the best science of the day on how to manage these animals and get the best production. So I appreciate, that aspect of my family's history. But also, they ended up moving back to Pennsylvania to take over a farmstead that some part of my family had from 1850. So they came back in the late 1930s, and my grandfather was just a little kid at that time, and he later actually kind of wrote his own memoir about those years of like the late 1930s and the World War II years, because few people are around who remember that time.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But what was striking was that community was struggling so much. I mean, these were really small farms. They were basically a subsistence farming. I mean, they were not producing a whole lot that was going on to any kind of open market at that time. And they were in tough shape in those World War II years, especially. Yeah. And they really got by helping each other as families in that community. So I definitely appreciate that attention to human support and human compassion and help for each other. But in terms of my grandparents, my grandpa ended up actually deciding to take over the farm from his dad and did not go to college, which created some tension with his older brother who had gone to college. So there was this kind of like educational tension of like, you didn't go, but I went. And but my grandpa and my grandma both were just voracious learners, like always reading, always doing things in book clubs and nature clubs and all sorts of things. And so I appreciate that they were such great learners and really encouraged their kids and their grandkids, including me, to go on those educational journeys and ventures. So I kind of had that dual experience looking back at that family line of, the person who went off and did the formal education and had opportunities because of that. And then, my other role models who are really just lifelong learners in their own right, who worked, so hard, were so creative because they were motivated to do that. So that's kind of all part of my history that is probably not apparent to people, but is still there in the background.
With Jenny, as I work with you, so I grew up in a Michael did too, in a rural place. And yes, I know how to milk a cow. And I used to get up and milk 2 cows and 7 goats every morning. And there's something about that work ethic that's built around that farm. It creates, I think, a lifetime pattern of strong work ethic. That was the first part I noticed about you. And then when you talk about the connectivity, the support, the things, when you talked about your grandpa and others joining clubs and book clubs, this is all type of social community that they're creating that is so important. And frankly, I'm going to pull it back to higher education. It's something that may be missing, that we're not doing as effectively, but you've been effective in doing this. So that's great. Michael, don't you think having those chores in the morning and growing up in a rural place makes a difference? I do.
I don't know if it makes a good difference, but
well, when you're doing it
over
doesn't feel that way. But boy, are the cows and goats happy after they've been fed and milked. Yeah.
No, I think there's a connection between the physical labor part of it and your mental growth, your desire to learn, not to get out of the physical labor, but to enjoy both. I mean, I think of my own background on both sides of my family of having both of those things, that it was kind of ingrained in me growing up with my grandfather living in a connected house. We worked a lot because he never stopped, and one of the smartest people I knew, in math and in construction and running his business and all of those sorts of things. Just learning from those generations is something I think we miss sometimes when we're not connected to those generations. And, Jenny, you grew up in a place where you were connected. I grew up connected, trying to do that with my own, kids and grandkids as well, is to try and keep that connection, because there's something to learn from generations who have been through the struggle and come out the other side, and in some ways just so much stronger. So thanks for sharing that, Jenny. That's awesome.
Yeah, I'm definitely not squeamish about dirt.
Yeah. Which is good. Yeah. I mean, to understand that work, I actually wish I could take every child in the city and give them a rural experience of, actually seeing how things actually come together, how plants grow, how, animals are fed, how they're harvested, those type of things. I think it'd be a great learning experience. There we go. And there we have a whole new experiential program that will
Experiential learning, adventure learning.
For all that with that. But
a real
Jenny,
lab.
Speaking of this, sort of connecting to this, Jenny, I'm going to jump to the idea of, we have this background of work ethic and community, but you also have a background in the humanities, right? You are have a PhD in literature, which is awesome. How does that connect and influence your leadership as well?
That's a good question. I've thought a lot about that in recent years, I think, looking at changes in the world, the technologies that are developing, the way that higher education keeps changing. I mean, for me, I think it has kind of two streams there because, as an English professor, I did what most English professors do. I taught writing and I also taught literature. So to me, those are sort of two different avenues of thought. But thinking about the teaching of writing and working with students, all the way from freshmen in college just coming into their first class to doctoral students who are coming into a much more advanced stage of trying to put forward their own ideas. One thing that I keep coming back to right now is this idea of writing as thinking. And that's not a new concept, but it feels to me ever more important because the way we engage the writing process is so much tied to the evolution of our own thought. We think in order to write, we write in order to think, and the two things keep building off of each other. And to me, that's so important. One thing I think it might be easy these days to miss if we rely a little too much on technology to generate ideas for us or even to generate revisions for us, as useful as that can be, there's a power in having to do the work of thinking through the writing and making choices in the writing to convey that thought. So, one super nerdy textbook that I used once upon a time, more with an advanced writing class, it was this text called Rhetorical Grammar, which would put most people to sleep immediately. But the idea that I really loved about it was that when we make choices in our sentence structure, in the form of our sentences and paragraphs, those are rhetorical choices that lend to meaning and emphasis. They're not just, can you tell the difference between a compound sentence and a complex sentence? Whether you choose to write something as two thoughts put together in a compound sentence, or whether you choose to make one of those thoughts an embedded internal thought within a larger sentence, makes a big rhetorical difference. And I think we take that for granted, or we're outsourcing that to some extent in the way that a lot of us tend to write if we're relying a lot on other technologies to help us, as good as they are. To me, there's tremendous value in making choices as to the form of our thoughts. And I don't want to lose that in our educational journey, because it matters the way that we express ourselves and structure our thoughts. Even choices like saying, what I'm trying to say here is, that's a rhetorical structure in itself that an editor may tell you is not the most concise way to say it. No, it's not, but there are times when we want to, explicitly call attention to the point that we're making, and we do things like that. Those are rhetorical choices. So to me, that's one avenue coming out of the writing arena that I keep coming back to as being important for us and for students to engage with in terms of learning how to think.
So, Jenny, question around that. Are you finding our writing is becoming maybe more similar, maybe because of using Grammarly and AI tools and other editing software? Is something happening to the way that we write and therefore the way we think? because of these tools? What do you think?
I would argue that that could certainly be the case when you consider, I mean, just the sort of typical ways that we communicate in everyday life now are so much more truncated and even
Yeah.
like non-linguistic in the sense of like just sending emojis to each other or sending pictures of each other's faces like our kids do. Um, we're not asking ourselves as much to formulate a complete thought that has sequence and that has
Right.
hierarchical structure to it. So I think there is some sense there that if we are over relying on a tool to help us structure our thoughts, it might become more homogeneous. Now I know like AIs can be trained to write in the style of certain
Yeah.
certain people, they can, write me something that's in this style that mimics this person, but I still think there's something to be said for individual voice
Yeah.
being important. And I would not want to see that diminish in writing. I mean, when we speak to each other, we can see and hear each other's personalities and intonation and individual voice, but I don't want that to become lost in the written medium just because we're using aids to help us do things quicker.
Yeah. I do notice that my own writing has shifted over the last few years, from the very messy drafts that I usually begin with. And I handwrite in my journals because I find it helps me think better. But I also think that when I start writing, whether it's an email or whatever, or the book or whatever, it's always messy at first. And then I figure out what I mean. And then I can write it maybe a little bit better. But it's when I shortcut that and say, hey, just ChatGPT, write this for me. It kind of shortcuts some things. And sometimes I love it. And sometimes I'm like, that's not really me. This is my personal gut experience in using these things extensively over the last several years. I don't know what it means in the rest of the writing and thinking world.
Well, one of the things that you said earlier, Jenny, and it harkens back to William Zinsser, which is clear writing is clear thinking, and vice versa.
Mhm.
Clear thinking is clear writing. You're using that not only in the creation of written things and thinking, but you're also talking, I think, also about how people think about things, and maybe some of those thoughts and ideas that they have that are also those choices of what those thoughts that they have, that they're thinking, also have an impact on them, externally. And I think that's really important. You have subsequently, I mean, actually over a long period of time, gone through, I would say, a professional development journey. We got to hear about, your teaching your PhD. Could you talk about some of your other professional development that you think has influenced your leadership and your ability to, coach and help others?
Yeah, absolutely. At some point, I do want to circle back around to literature too, because
Yeah.
to me, that still has an enormous value that's a little bit different than the writing piece.
Yeah.
But in terms of my own professional journey, there have really been some milestones along the road that helped me to think about working at a kind of strategic institutional level, which is what I discovered that I really like to do. So, I started off as a faculty member, but because of really life synchronicities, I ended up moving into more of a central role, working with graduate student professional development and faculty development, at a big land-grant state university. And that kind of allowed me to see all of higher education from kind of this, I would say, a little bit more meta viewpoint, looking across a larger institution that had multiple schools and colleges within it, and kind of seeing the way that all of these different pieces function together, how each college was really structured a little bit differently, how the leadership of that college functioned differently, how faculty from different disciplines think about their work in similar and different ways, that they have this very disciplinary mindset. One of those early experiences during that time that was really interesting and formative for me was going through something called this Institute for Scientific Teaching, which was coming out of Yale University. And it was basically the idea of it was kind of geared towards scientists, but it was also about teaching scientifically, which meant bringing in principles of learning theory, of active
Yeah.
learning. Kind of, I often thought about it as getting away from like the tyranny of content, like this idea that you have a textbook and you must teach all 13 chapters of the textbook in order
must
to have a
Cover
class.
everything. You have to
You
cover it.
right? Whatever cover actually means, probably the students aren't getting very much out of that. So this, this institute experience was really brought in faculty from other institutions. And the goal was for them to come away with a way that they could redesign a course that they were actually teaching to get to those kind of, what are the core competencies that you really want students to be able to know and do 6 months or a year or more after this course is over? Are they going to remember, the intricacies of every part of this content? No, probably not, but they can look it up. We have the internet.
Right.
What do you really want them to be able to know and do? So that was a really formative kind of learning and teaching experience that kind of built on what I already did. I mean, I was a literature professor, so I was always in a seminar style environment. I almost never lectured to students because that just didn't fit what I was doing, but it brought in more of the learning theory behind it. And then as I was moving into more leadership roles, probably the most formative experience was the HERS Executive Leadership Institute, which was an institute for women in higher education that was geared towards helping women advance into more executive roles. The version that I went to was over a whole academic year in Massachusetts. I traveled to the Wellesley campus like 4 or 5 times over the academic year for like 4 or 5 days at a stretch. And we had a group of maybe 50 to 60 women there from very different types of institutions, everything from community college to R1 university to medical center to liberal arts college, every type of institution basically. And we talked kind of about the whole gamut of leadership within higher education. So some of our personal leadership traits, like our personality traits, our communication styles, how we work through conflict and manage conflict, but also just like higher education writ large. Like, what are the financial models that are at play? How are systems structured? How do we get funded? How do we negotiate, issues with faculty or staff roles, things like that. So kind of looking at the large picture. And that was really important to me because I already felt like I enjoyed working at kind of the university level, but that, put a lot more kind of frameworks behind it so that I could think about, how is it that the pieces of a university are fit together? How does IT interact with finance? How does marketing interact with academics? And how can we make those interactions, better and more fruitful for the institution? So that was really a big one for me. Also having the opportunity to work with, we had Civitas partnering with the institution, which was like a company that was focused on using data to produce better student outcomes, basically. But they also, I was part of a leadership institute with them as well, that was really focused on bringing together people from different parts of the university, again, so that we could get out of our silo and the viewpoint that we were typically coming from and really look at data in the university in a new way to figure out, well, you have this piece of data about admissions over here. How does it influence, which students are ending up in the classroom and which, what kind of academic struggles they might be having over here. So it was a really nice way of connecting some of those dots and starting to see really how to collaborate better with other parts of the university.
Yeah. So how did those affect your practice over the years, both the experience of hers and working with the data company and stuff? How did it change things for you over the next few years?
It really changed the way that I went into collaborative projects and meetings with members of teams from other places across the university because I had a much greater understanding of what their priorities likely were, how their priorities were not the same as mine necessarily,
Yeah.
and how then maybe to better speak their language in terms of getting to a common goal. So I realized early on, I give this example a lot to people. I was in meetings with IT a lot. And for a while, I thought these people in IT just did not like me because I would say something and they'd be like, nope, can't do that. Nope, not in the project. Nope. And then I realized at some point that their basic framework that they were working from at that time was the project is scoped, we've gathered the requirements, and we're not changing them. And every time I said something that I thought was like a great idea, they were thinking, that's not in scope. We didn't budget for that. We don't have enough people to do that. And you're just blowing our project out of the water. So stop it. So I had to realize that we were coming at things from different perspectives. And that gave me a much better appreciation for, okay, I need to do better at the front end of a project to help understand how the requirements are going to shape what they do later on. But then I think they also got better. They kind of moved towards more agile approach as well. So that if I came up with, or someone came up with an idea that wasn't in the original scope, they could kind of take a step back and go, what is more important? Do you want feature A or do you want feature B? Which one do you want us to work on to meet the need? And that made it better as well. So, having that deeper knowledge just helped me change my interactions so that I understood where people were coming from a lot better.
This concludes part 1 of our conversation with Dr. Jenny Douglas. And I hope that you're having as much fun as we are. And next time we're going to jump into some more leadership tips and exercises to help us be more of our full selves as we lead through the challenges of our times. So be sure to join us.
Thanks for spending time with us on the Engaged by Design podcast. We'd love to hear your biggest takeaway from this episode and what you're trying next. Please follow the show, and if you found value here, share it with a friend and leave a quick rating. Until next time, stay engaged by design.